Hey, Vampire Logan here. Trying again. I tried to start the stream a little earlier and it didn't work, but hopefully this time it will work. I am doing a Funday Monday today, and I want to talk about some D&D issues, specifically taking a look at old-fashioned RPG DM advice from the past, and maybe not too distant past, but I want to take a look at a few little pieces of advice that I've both received and given in the history I've been playing as a DM. And some of these things are we're going to look at how different they are nowadays than possibly when the advice was more relevant. But let's start with the first one, which is making a rule at the table and looking it up later, which basically means if you're playing along and something is happening in your game and it's the flow of the game is going really well, but then someone has a rules question. A good idea in the past has been to not look it up, but make a ruling at the table. At If you don't know what the rule is, then just make something up or roll some dice to handle it, and then look it up later, and then adjust your game in the future from that point on after you know how the rule works, or maybe retcon some things that happen. But what I find nowadays is the reason that that was a problem before is because the DM would sit there and open up their book, try and either look in the index to find the page or scroll through to where they knew something was going to be, then spend a few seconds like reading the description of the feature and all the flavor text and skipping past that, and it would take a while and it would interrupt the game and it would kind of slow things down. But now I feel like if you're playing, especially if you're playing with an online tool of some kind, like D&D Beyond for looking up stuff, or you're playing on a VTT, these tools make it kind of not really as relevant to need to do that. I mean, obviously you do get stuck, and that could still be good advice, but with the speed at which you can look up a rule, or even like the certain VTTs like Fantasy Grounds will take care of some of those rules for you. So if you're playing a combat, you could be not really know what the rules for, say, grappling are, but in the description of the character's abilities, you can right click on those things and see what the rules actually are right there and then, and possibly just drag something over into the dice rolling box, and it'll just roll the dice for you. So it is pretty quick nowadays to look something up, and you don't have to look it up in a book, page through pages, and looking through an index. So I think that's kind of a rule that if you're playing with a VTT or you have access to a computer while you're playing, it can be still pretty quick to look things up. So especially if you get better at having things bookmarked, or keeping certain pages open, you can have, like I do with Chrome. I have like probably about 30 or 40 tabs open. You can just go click through them and have everything set up. Same thing goes for VTT, like Fantasy Grounds. There are tabs and buttons you can hook up to have quick lookups of things, especially for your story and things like that too. It still can show you a lot of information about the story and where that's going, or if you're running a module. All right, next topic is fudging die rolls. This is another thing that a lot of DM advice used to say. You should. I think it went kind of back and forth, but either you should fudge die rolls and roll everything behind the screen so you can still make decisions on how to keep the flow and the challenge level for the players high or low, depending on what's happening in the game. There are other diehard DMs who also say, it's better to fudge or not to fudge die rolls and roll everything out in the open so players know that you're not being unfair. Although, really, if a DM really wanted to be unfair, they could be unfair without fudging die rolls. There's lots of other ways, having all the monsters attack one of the characters or things like that. And that may even be more realistic too, but generally it's frowned upon to kind of focus on one player's character. And for fudging die rolls, I used to, when I was a younger DM, and playing mostly with just my friends in real IRL, I would tend to fudge die rolls behind the screen in favor of the players because I didn't. If I had balanced an encounter way too hard, which was pretty common back then, and I would just always throw more powerful monsters than they could handle at them. So then I would just tone things back and maybe fudge a few die rolls in their favor to make it so that they still had a challenge but had an easier time defeating a creature that I may have put in that was too powerful. So I went back and forth on that over the years, and I feel that in a game system like D&D, especially fifth edition, where it is really hard to gauge the challenge levels because the challenge rating system is really terrible. I think fudging some die rolls here and there might be an okay thing to do, but with current VTTs, you can easily roll everything in front of the players because it's on the shared screen. So I think that's a better way to just let the dice roll as they may. And if players go, it depends on what you want in your game. If your players want you to be strictly fair and just rely on die rolls, then you can do that. But I also find that it's still kind of better. This may not be really fudging die rolls, but just having the encounters kind of wrap up instead of continuously, from round to round, if players are just keep missing or enemies keep missing. It gets a little boring back and forth, and especially if you're not very descriptive on your combat. So in those cases, you don't really need to fudge a die roll to just say, look, the encounter, you guys are already winning. You wrap it up, and here's a couple more things that happened. Or maybe you just do, a single round more, and then however that turns out, you can finish things off narratively. But yeah, for fudging die rolls, I lean more now towards not fudging die rolls and just letting them fall where they may and trying to gauge the probabilities a little better on planning encounters. Or just, having lots of easier encounters and then maybe one really hard one at the end of the adventure or end of the session. Another old piece of advice was alignment, or this is more of a bone of contention. A lot of people have said, we don't really need alignment anymore. People just play their characters the way they play them. And then other people are say they really like alignment, and there's a few spells still that are tied to a specific alignments, like detect or protection from good or evil. I think I used to go back and forth on this one as well many times. It's certain times I've thrown away the whole alignment system and kind of just reworked the spells to just be powerful evil or good beings like demons and angels. And then I've gone back and made up characters and used the alignment system again. I generally tend to play chaotic good characters almost all the time, so that ended up being just the standard alignment that I would often play, and most other players would also choose that. So I think if you know really strongly what your theme is and you get the players to build their characters along with a theme, you kind of don't really need it anymore. So I'm in favor now of this one of just throwing it away or keeping it very much in the background. And then another one, topic I wanted to get into was communication. In the old days of DMing, DMs would basically hide all information and not communicate anything to the players before and during the game as to what's going to happen. This is pretty old school. It's like basically you prepare an adventure. The players have no idea what's going to happen. They get together, they meet in a tavern, and then they head out and go into the dungeon. And your dungeon is a big surprise to everyone. Although they tend to kind of all end up a little bit the same. Now there's a lot more focus on storytelling in a lot of games and drama and acting out things, and it's a little more sophisticated now than just jumping into a dungeon. You still can do that, obviously, but out of game communication is a lot more important these days, especially if you're doing a game sort of like Critical Role or some of the other actual plays out there. You want to kind of get some idea of what the players want to do, talk back and forth about what they want for their characters, get a lot more information, give a lot more information about what you like running and what you want to do. If you like a lot more tactical combat and some other players only want to role play, that can be, or whatever the balance you have of those 50-50 or 80-20. You should really try to line up with your players on what they like for that. So, so some of those things now that are things we didn't have back in the day, like pre-game ideas, like the session zero. We started doing that a little bit in the later part of the 90s, but originally there was that. Now it seems like it's a necessity to have a session zero, and I totally agree with it. It definitely allows you to set a bunch of expectations on both the DM side and the player side. So you should set up a time to have either have just a discussion, like a pre-game discussion, or have an actual session where you first discuss and make up characters and discuss all the out of game stuff like boundaries, content warnings, comfort levels, inclusivity, lethality, and DM style. And then that's also a time for you to get the player expectations and DM expectations. So, and then usually if you can get through that stuff pretty quickly, you can have a first session to sort of give everybody an example of your DM style and of your what the players want and how they're going to play together, and a first chance to use their abilities. In game, also, there should be some good communication, and it's not necessarily just communicating what's happening in the game. You want to things in the past where you didn't communicate is when the combat is getting fatal, or DMs would sometimes set up situations where the players are supposed to figure out that the situation that they're going into is out of their league, but they would, in the old days, you wouldn't always let the players know. You just sometimes they'd go in and like get slaughtered by something, and the players don't often know like how powerful some of the monsters are. So if you're first level characters and you're going up against a stone giant, definitely that's something you should run away from. But a lot of players were new and didn't know that, so it turned into bad situations. I remember one time I had early on in high school playing D&D with a bunch of people that we played at lunchtime in the library, and there was a new player had joined the group, and the party encountered some stone giants specifically. That was the situation, and the one new player decided to charge at them with his. He was a barbarian, but he charged at him with his two-handed sword, and the first stone giant threw a rock at him and did like middling amount of damage, and it just basically killed the first level character instantly. And so that guy got very upset, crumpled up his character sheet and threw it at me. And I thought it was funny at the time, but it's a teenager. But I didn't really. Afterwards, I thought about it. I was like, I probably should have, given him some kind of warning, because he didn't know that that was going to happen, and it wasn't really fair to him. And I understand why he got upset. So I wish I'd had a chance to apologize to him too for doing that, because I think he might have been interested in D&D, but I think that kind of just ended his interest in it for the future, as far as I know. So yeah, that kind of sucked. But when you're a kid, you kind of don't really think about those things. So uh, yeah, and I think another thing to do is sometimes the DMs will say, describe a situation and then expect the players to just sort of pick up any of the details that they just described. It's really important for the DM to point out relevant info that the characters would know if the character was actually there and seeing that stuff. So if the player missed something because they weren't paying attention, their character would still know and think about things. So if there's any case where um, you can sort of, as the DM, say your character would know this. You don't need to make a bunch of rolls for that to happen. You can actually just tell them. And then this also applies too for making sure that if you are playing, weekly or even monthly, uh, people are going to forget, even with a game that's playing weekly, what happened last time. So a recap from the DM and the players. I always recommend that the players and the DM craft the recap so that you can sort of see what the players remember and also provide the information that they might have missed. So I feel like that's a collaborative effort. Um, and also, I also encourage my players to take notes and sort of. In the past, I gave extra experience points for um, players who did keep notes and submitted their notes to me. I would give them extra XP for it, which was a lot of fun for me to read those notes, especially if they wrote it as like just point form. I would give them a certain amount of XP, and then if they wrote it out as if it was the character's diary in the sort of character voice of the character writing it, I'd give them even more, like sometimes double or triple. So those are some cool ideas you can do with just to keep the information flowing from to and from the DMs and players. And also, I like that idea of assigning, like, not really homework, but it's more like fun homework that the players can do, since the DM is spending so much time like doing prep and building stories and creating NPCs and stuff like that and monsters. It's really good to have the players kind of get that involved too, and they can talk about their characters and make notes on what their character would remember and what their feelings about those things were that you might not actually those things might not actually come up in game. So if the DM can read what the player is thinking about things with these kind of wrap ups from the players, their sort of diaries and thoughts and things like that, you can get a lot more information, get a little more involved in what the players want. Because if they focus on something, that's something they're really interested in. You can put more of that in, or put stories in that they have thought up in their backstory or uh, in their what they thought happened. And you can sometimes get more new ideas for what to do next from the players, thoughts on what they think might be happening, and just make that, yeah, that's actually better than what I had in mind. So those are some things you can do, and this is all old advice, but some of it's still relevant, some of it's still a little bit dated and needs updating, and there are a lot of tools now to help you. So go out there, find those tools, use them, and have some fun out there gaming and DMing.